Well, good morning and welcome to Good Business Pays TV. We are the podcast, as you know, where we interview what we call the fast payers, the fastest paying businesses in the UK. And today we're delighted to have with us Toby Kelly, who is the Chief Executive of the very well-known travel company Trailfinders. Welcome to you, Toby. Pleased to have you here.
Thanks very much. Very pleased to see you.
So first question, I guess, is lots of people will recognize Trailfinders, but there's a lot to this company that people don't know about as well. So can you give us a bit of an overview of Trailfinders and maybe share some of the things that people don't know about the company as well?
Yeah, I'll try and give a potted history of Trailfinders. So Trailfinders begun in 1970. Four friends who were in the army together were looking for employment post-army and decided that driving Range Rovers or Land Rovers from London to Nairobi and to Kathmandu and things would be a lot of fun and were skills that they felt they had. They quickly realised that wasn't going to be a terribly successful business, as fun as it was, and they morphed into, I suppose, being one of the first bucket shops. As airlines expanded and 747s arrived on the scenes, airlines had lots of spare capacity, and so a very successful era as a bucket shop selling flights all over the world. And we've still got our aeroplane in our sort of logo, which I suppose speaks to that. But it evolved, I suppose, every 10 years or so. Trailfinders has evolved, which I think is very much the hallmark of its success. And as hotels started getting built, particularly in Southeast Asia, and there's suddenly enormous hotels in Bangkok or Koh Samui or wherever else it might be. Again, they're looking for an outlet, and I suppose we came to be part of that answer, combining it with the flights where we were already very successful, and that evolution's continued into touring. We started selling cruises about 15 years ago. Only really about 5 years ago did we really start selling Europe with any real sort of purpose or endeavour, and we've continued to evolve, I suppose, based on what our clients have asked us for. And we're incredibly fortunate that we've still got some clients who first booked with us in the 1970s and 1980s, still booking with us today. And you know, the principles, I suppose, the core of the business hasn't really changed, I would say. I've only been at Trailfinders 25 years, but so not quite half of that time. But it's the principles haven't really changed. But what we've sold and how we've gone about things has changed. So we're now got about 1,000 staff, and we are in the UK and Ireland, and we've got 44, soon to be 45. We open our 45th travel centre or shop in Ealing in a couple of weeks' time. And yeah, we've grown, I suppose, fairly slowly, a couple of shops a year, that sort of thing. But a successful business, still owned by the original founder, or the one of those four original founders who stuck at it. It's still owned entirely by Sir Mike Gooley, who is very much still involved in the business after 54 years.
So you mentioned travel shops. So in the travel business, is there still life on the high street, as they say, for travel agents as well as online?
Yeah, I think it's a really good question. I think it's something that Mike talked about, that probably 20 odd years ago he was told that bricks and mortar and high streets were not going to last as travel agents as the sort of online options and OTAs came into being. But I think if you're providing a good quality service, then there's always demand for it. And actually we're seeing really, really strong demand for particularly complex trips when people have got a big trip, perhaps an anniversary or a honeymoon, or it's just going further afield than perhaps they're familiar with. They often come to us, and that's often the first introduction with us. We're very happy to book the simple trips too, but it's often those where suddenly we want to go to Africa, or we want to drive around New Zealand, or we want to do a big road trip in the States, and how do we start doing that, and how do we plan it? And that's often where people will come into our travel centres and speak to someone who's typically done it, and often spending 2, 3, 4 hours sometimes, and walking out with a fantastic holiday, we hope.
I think that, I worked in the travel industry a long time ago, and even from the early days, it felt like Trailfinders was the company you went to if you were a bit more adventurous than the standard traveller, whether it had something to do with the name or the logo or the types of holidays you booked, some of it can be pretty daunting, can't it, to the regular person, that mapping out how they're going to get from London to Greece on a train or something through a complicated set of connections or whatever it happens to be.
Yeah, I think that's exactly it. But it's also about speaking. South Africa is a destination that I really love, and I've been to many times. But often, if someone hasn't been there, their first thought turns to safety and security. And people will often talk to us about that. We sell a lot of holidays to Southern Africa, because we can help people, reassure them first and foremost, but also we can tell them about how to visit those locations in a very safe way. And I've never seen or heard really of any issues whilst I've been in South Africa. But it's where there's some uncertainty about the logistics, or uncertainty about how you travel there, or how do you do a rail trip around Japan, or how do you book the parks when you've got a motorhome in New Zealand. So where it's unfamiliar territory, that's often the first booking with Trailfinders. But then we book a lot of relatively simple holidays, a week in Mauritius, a week in the Maldives, an all-inclusive hotel in the Caribbean. We book a lot of that as well for our regular clients. But that's not usually the first trip that people think of us for or come to us for.
It does seem that there's a big element of trust with these more complicated, but also then on to the simple ones as well, that there's a relationship of trust between the customer and the agent in this. And one of the things I picked up on when reading about Trailfinders, when you first won our Good Business Pays Fast Payer Awards, was from the very start, I think your founder, Mike Gooley, said that the money that comes in from the customer should be held in a trust account. And I think the words I read on your site were so that that your money is safe until you return back to your house after your holiday. That seems to be a pretty big and important promise, and probably has implications for the business over the years.
Yeah, I think it's always been an important thing. I think it's something that we've not always shouted about, and there's not necessarily that much awareness about. But it very much came to the fore in the pandemic, where it was obvious why it was so important and so relevant. So when Mike and his friends, colleagues set up the business, they always felt it was important to have two bank accounts, one for their money, the company's money, and one for clients' money. So the two didn't get muddled up, because you're entrusted with very large sums of money for deposits and final payments for people's holiday. And they felt, well, we shouldn't be spending that on paying our rent and our rates, or paying ourselves. That should only be spent on their holiday. And then at the point where their holiday is complete, whatever profit, commission, etc., then that comes to us. We've earned our money at that point, and that's when we're entitled to take it. So that very simple principle, from four people who'd never really been in business, they felt that was the ethical and right way to operate. And really, we've carried on with that, and that commitment's been formalised over time. Initially in a formal trust account, and latterly confirming that all of that money must remain in trust, every single penny of it, until travel's complete, which we felt was a really important commitment to make. It goes further than the sort of the regulations require, albeit the CAA continue to talk about making something like that mandatory, which we feel it should be, because all of the big failures in travel, the Thomas Cook being perhaps the most recent large failure, stem from being allowed to be undercapitalized, being allowed to spend that client money as if it was your own, as working capital is the term that's commonly used, and not having to properly fund your business. So if you want to buy a hotel, you can use your client's money to buy yourself a hotel, and suddenly their cash is no longer available to pay the balance of their holiday, which has, I think, an important effect for the customer, but it also has an important effect for the hotelier. And I'm sure if you quiz hotels in the likes of Spain, they would tell you about how late they are sometimes paid, because presumably these companies haven't got that money to hand because of this sort of hand-to-mouth way they're operating. They're not keeping the client money safe and secure. So we keep all of it in trust with independent trustees to ensure that we follow the rules. and it was the pandemic, I suppose, which revealed the importance of that. We were one of relative few companies that were able to refund clients immediately when their trip wasn't able to go ahead, and heartbreakingly tens of thousands of trips, probably hundreds of thousands of trips by the time we were all done, weren't able to go ahead, and we were able to offer the client, well, we can rebook this for 6 months or a year's time if you like, or we can give you an immediate refund, which was a fabulous position to be in. And we're fortunate that Trailfinders is very well capitalised, and Mike had made all those decisions historically, so we were in a position to be able to refund people immediately. Whereas a lot of other travel companies, simply they didn't have that money, and they were issuing IOUs in effect to customers saying, well, here's a note. When you're ready to book a holiday, you can use this note to book it. But of course, they might have other plans for that money. It isn't yours. You're not entitled to it. If the holiday can't go ahead, they're entitled to their money back, which we were in a fortunate position, but in terms of ethically, morally, it felt exactly the right thing to do. And that certainly served us really well. It served us really well coming out of the pandemic, because a lot of people had been let down, and not only hadn't we let our customers down, we'd done the right thing by them, but obviously word had spread. We've seen a lot of customers arrive over the last couple of years, a first booking with Trailfinders, some of them in their perhaps 50s and 60s who are making their first booking with Trailfinders because their agent or their direct booking let them down, and they wanted to book with a company that would look after them.
And of course, you've only talked about, well, a big group of stakeholders, but one group of stakeholders, your traveling customers. There's also then all of the other people on the other hand of the hotels and the holiday companies and the airlines and what have you, that you presumably have commitments to as well. It must be quite a tricky thing to balance, where perhaps you've got to refund customers over here for things that aren't going to happen, but you've got to pay other people ahead of time to be able to keep them happy, right? To keep that relationship. How does that work? Must be very tricky.
It is and it isn't, I suppose. So on the one hand, if we have to make prepayments, and prepayments to airlines would be the major overhead in advance that a travel company would have. I can't think any airline is going to allow you to owe them till after the flight for their flight. They're going to want paying weeks or often months in advance. So that comes out of Trailfinders money. And we're very fortunate that Sir Mike, who owns the company, doesn't have particularly lavish tastes. Instead of buying a super yacht, he's left the money in the business over many decades, left the profits in the business over many decades. So we're in a position that we're able to do that. We're very, very well capitalised. But also, there's an advantage when you're having those commercial negotiations with partners about terms of payment. And if they understand that all client payments are in trust until travel's complete, it makes many of them more relaxed about what the payment terms are for those suppliers, because they know they're not going to end up in a game of sort of payment musical chairs with the person without a chair at the end of it. They know they will be paid on time, no matter what. And even when occasionally a trip can't go ahead, and we have to pay the supplier and we have to refund the client, and that's a cost that we bear as a package operator. The fairer you treat people, your partners, your suppliers, the fairer they treat you in those situations. So there's certainly commercial benefits for behaving in that way and behaving in the right way, which are perhaps less obvious. But if you treat other people well, they tend to treat you well.
And I guess apart from doing the right thing, that phrase of doing the right thing, I'm assuming that both your suppliers and you see a business benefit of having that kind of trusted relationship there, whatever that be. You get the first option on new things that they're bringing out or what have you. There must be some. Can you think of any examples of where you as an organization have benefited from that kind of do the right thing policy with suppliers?
I'm sure we have. It's hard to point to it, but I would say it comes in two parts. It comes in when we need some favours and some latitude on what the contract is, perhaps because a client has had to cancel at last minute, their insurance perhaps won't pay out, and we'll then ask the supplier is there any chance you can look at this again rather than just the terms and conditions to give the client a better outcome? So there are small examples like that where clients find themselves in a difficult situation, which is often around health or what have you. But also there's relatively subtle things around, we're more likely to get a free room upgrade agreed by a hotel because we've got that good relationship, or hard to sort of to count how often this happens. But again, our clients being looked after perhaps that little bit better in resort, perhaps getting that room upgrade, perhaps getting a bottle of wine in their room. So small touches like that. We do the right thing by our partners, but they fulfill such an important role for us in keeping our promises and fulfilling our holidays. And as well as we try to do everything, we've got a really capable, engaged team of people in Trailfinders on the front lines and off the front lines. But we're only as good as those partners and the service, and we don't run any hotels, we don't operate any airlines, so we're only as good as those partners, and they look after our clients really well, which I think is all wrapped up in that trust and that long-term relationship.
Yeah, it is. And it instills a sense of confidence in the supplier that the money's going to be there, so we can invest in better stuff, which keeps your customers happy. There's a sort of circle there that works well. Now, you've been there quite a long time at Trailfinders. I noticed from almost 25 years now. So one of the things, and I'm interested in your perspective on this. We did a study 2 years ago called Understanding Payment Culture. In fact, Trailfinders, I think, was featured in that as one of the companies that has been consistently paying fast. But one of the things that we did in there was we looked at the tenure of the CEO and the CFO together in the top 100 paying companies. And what we found was that in the 100 fastest paying companies, the joint tenure of the finance and the CEO was over 20 years, which in your case, of course, you've hit that mark a few years ago. But my hypothesis, and this is what I'm interested in testing with you, is that when people have been with a company, and they don't have to have been in it to run it all those years, but when they've been in it all those years, they understand the customer, they understand the ecosystem, they understand the suppliers, and kind of what makes that work in the simplest terms. And because they understand what makes it work, they can make braver decisions about payment times and faster payment, because they understand how important each element is. But that's just a hypothesis. Well, tell me about if you think that's right or wrong or different, and also about your own journey at Trailfinders.
Largely, I think you're right. Although I suppose in Trailfinders' sense, our culture, our DNA, our integrity stems from the way our founder and owner expects us to run the company, and we've all grown up within that. Something we talk to people about in recruitment is that we are a company that cares about our clients, and we try then employ people who care about our clients and then care about the level of service we're providing. And so I suppose the people that are within the business and those who remain in the business for a long time, of which there are certainly many who've been here longer than I have, long tenures really common. I think it's within our sales team it's an average of 8 years, and it's slightly longer when you look at the company as a whole. But I began at Trailfinders nearly 25 years ago in 1999. I joined as a sales consultant. One of the really unusual things about Trailfinders, but I think it does relates to that understanding of culture and understanding of the business, is that everybody joins at the bottom. And all promotions, with a couple of exceptions in very technical areas, all promotions are internal. So by the time someone gets into a management position or a director position, they really do understand the business. They've typically done several jobs within it. And my history was a sales consultant. Then I started selling first and business class travel in our Oxford travel centre when that opened. I then moved to Canterbury to run that travel centre when we opened that. Then came back to be our training and development manager briefly, then the sales director for a few years, and then I've been doing this job for around about 5 years now. So everyone grown up within the business and understands what our culture and expectations are. I think by virtue of having a single owner who takes a very long-term view. I think in many ways it's probably quite an old-fashioned view of not having any debt, growing slowly. We own most of the buildings we operate out of, so that we're not paying rent for the most part, and taking a really long-term view on that, but also taking a really long-term view on what success or profitability we're interested in. There's not an enormous pressure for every year to be our most profitable or to get a return because we've got to pay back a lump of debt that that's there, or servicing that. So we take a very long-term view around profitability, such that we can make very long-term decisions, and we can make the decisions that are right for the business, rather than perhaps some companies that are pressured into making quite short-term decisions, because that's the sort of the prudent and practical and necessary thing to do.
And I suppose one of the questions that I had was, and it's to do with the values of the business. Can you change a business to be one that has a better set of values, where, let's say they've got a couple of different stakeholders, well, three. One is the shareholders, of course, to answer to. One is the customers, and one is the suppliers in this instance. That a lot of organizations that I talk to want to get better at that, and they see companies like Trailfinders and other companies getting fast payer awards, or they want to get them to, but they don't know how to get there. I mean, it may not be the right question for you, because this is within the DNA of Trailfinders, but for other CEOs or other boards wanting to get better at this, do you have any recommendations? Leave and join a better company, maybe, or is it can you change your company values?
No, not at all. Of course you can. You can change the values. You can decide between those decision makers. You can decide what's important, what your values are, and what your priorities are, and it will mean resetting those priorities. And there may be other priorities that have to slip down the list to do that simplistically within travel. You can make a short-term decision to hold on to that money a little bit longer and get a few more pounds of interest, or whatever else it might be, or you can make a decision to forego that and pay people quickly and pay them on time and do the right thing and take those long-term benefits. And Trailfinders, I guess, is proof of concept in that regard. But yeah, if a company's properly capitalized, then they've got those choices to make. They can make those decisions, and they can reset to have the culture and the ethics that they want. And then I would have thought most employees would want to follow that journey. It's most people want to work for a business that they're proud of. So it does start at the top and making those decisions. Yes, if you've got multiple shareholders who have different priorities, of course that's a challenge to manage. But if there's the will, then it's certainly possible to reset and to get that business with the reputation that you value.
And we do quite a bit of work actually with the British Travel Association, who I'm sure you are aware of. And there does seem to be a problem, not with the bigger companies like yourselves, but with smaller ones that have to pay the airline today and then are on 120-day or 90-day terms from a big customer. Business travel, of course. Do you have any advice for that segment of the market who are struggling really in this market?
Yeah, I appreciate that is a challenge. I mean, I'm not sure to what extent there are different payment terms within different parts of travel. I've certainly heard that idea mooted, but I would imagine there are, if you're protecting client funds, you'll be viewed in the same way as someone else who's protecting client funds. I don't think airline partners or others are trying to hinder smaller businesses. So there may be some truth in that position. But again, it comes down to where your set of values are. Trailfinders once upon a time was a tiny entity with 4 staff and a tiny little flat setting up the business, and it isn't until relatively recently, I guess, that we'd be seen as a bigger player. But nonetheless, through that journey, the culture, the ethos, and those sort of rules around not touching client money have been sacrosanct. So it's definitely possible. It is just a trade-off.
And it comes back to strong culture, strong values, and presumably the board supporting that all the way through.
Yeah, I mean, in terms of the board, we've all been at Trailfinders a long time. I'm probably about the average sort of tenure within that. So we've all grown up within that DNA. We know what's important. We know looking after our clients is incredibly important. We know looking after our partners is incredibly important. There's a mission statement that Sir Mike wrote probably maybe 30 years ago now, which is that our obligation is to do the best for our clients, our partners, and our staff, and those are our obligations. And to protect client money is an important part within that. And everyone has grown up within that culture and within that understanding. So we all care about it. It's important to all of us. I guess that's partly why we've all hung around so long.
Well, Toby, that's the end of the interview. Absolutely fascinating. What a smashing company and a smashing brand. And I do think that more people ought to know about some of the things we didn't know about Trailfinders. Hopefully people have done that today. Toby, thanks very much for joining us.
Thanks, Terry.